The first, about Ukraine being Russia's oldest colony, I think has to be borne in mind in order to understand what's happening now.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. We start with video provided by Linda Sarsour. She writes, "This is how we end every summer night in my Palestinian village of El Bira." Now this gross picture. Biden and a fist bump with MBS. Evidently the gruesome murder of Khashoggi is no longer a problem. Supposedly MBS said Biden was being hypocritical. As grotesque and awful MBS is, he has a point. Consider this incident from 2009. In January 2009, Biden was vice president-elect, preparing to become number 2 in the Obama administration. Ghada Abu Halima lived with her 2 children in the Gaza Strip near the border with Israel, with her extended family. On January 4th, 2009, Israel bombed Gaza during another of their operations, which they obscenely describe as mowing the grass. On that day, they bombed the Halima house, causing a fire that killed 5 members of the family. And it burned Ghada Abu Halima severely. According to the Israeli group B'Tselem, the fire was caused by white phosphorus, a substance that can't be put out with water. Ghada Abu Halima was able to testify to B'Tselem, but sadly her burns were so severe that she died 10 weeks later. Neither Biden nor the Peace Prize winner Obama ever said a word criticizing Israel's Operation Cast Lead, nor the burning to death of Ghada Abu Halima and 5 other members of her family. On his recent trip, Biden said the relationship of the U.S. to Israel was extraordinary, unparalleled, indispensable, unshakable. We won't show a picture of the burn of Ghada Abu Halima, just this picture in her memory. And this photo, the last picture of Shireen Abu Akleh before her assassination by Israeli soldiers. The Washington Post aptly used video of melting popsicles to illustrate the latest heat wave. This was written in the Israeli paper Haaretz about Britain a week ago. 2 years ago, the country's meteorological service presented a hypothetical forecast for Britain's expected temperatures in 2050 in order to demonstrate the effects of climate change to the public. That forecast, slated for 30 years from now, is expected to hit the country next. In Britain, train service was severely hampered. Few people have air conditioning in that country. Remember, Britain has the same latitude of Quebec City, Quebec, and is notorious for its chilly and rainy climate. But temperature yesterday hit 104 degrees, shattering all records. In Portugal, it was worse. And Democracy Now! Says 1,000 people have died as a result of the latest heat wave. Last week in Bridgeport, Connecticut, temperatures were only in the low 80s as a climate action festival called Seaside Sounds took place. This candy cane painted tower is a remnant of the coal-burning energy plant in Bridgeport that closed a year or two ago. Music from performers under this structure entertained visitors to some 20 or so tables under canopies. The most imaginative exhibit came from the New Haven climate movement, with mock fish each bearing a climate message. These are messages from many other groups doing climate work. Promoting Enduring Peace had banners about its Bold Climate program and a new banner highlighting the need to get rid of gas-powered lawn equipment. Little Connecticut burns 40 million gallons of gasoline each year just on lawn care. In the U.S. as a whole, for lawn care, each year we burn 3 billion gallons of gasoline. We've got to go to electric equipment and to rewild a lot of the land. These are a few of the stickers given out by Promoting Enduring Peace. You can see all of them at the website peace.org. There are alternatives to gasoline-powered equipment. Note this Roomba-like lawnmower that works quietly without any toxic emissions. PEP took the festival as an occasion to start a petition calling on Connecticut's Governor Lamont to order an end to the use of gas-powered lawn equipment on state-owned land, like parks and forests and around state-owned buildings. The state is flush with cash. Now is the time to take action. Here's a QR code that gets you directly to the petition. A final point about climate. Here's a freeze frame from PEP's Climate Countdown Clock, showing the time we have left until 2030. May we humbly suggest that people demand special sessions of every state legislature to deal with the climate emergency. Measures like rationing fossil fuel. Several weeks ago, we featured an interview and a talk by Herbert Claros de Silva, a Brazilian unionist who took part in a solidarity delegation on a trip to Ukraine. Today, part two of the talks given in the New Haven Library by members of that delegation. This one about direct action and confrontation with the bosses in Brazil. The speaker is a man named Mancha. To save time, we again superimposed the translation from the Portuguese to English over the video. It makes the video a bit choppy. Please excuse us.
Boa noite, eu sou metalúrgico da General Motors.
Good evening. I'm a metal worker with General Motors, and I've come here along with four of my comrades whose names are Antonio, Renato,
E Antônio.
and Antonio. Those are their names who have come with him from General Motors. And so I want to talk about another important principle of CSP Conlutas, which is to put militant action above and beyond sort of the questions of procedure. So for us, direct action and confrontation with the boss is of extreme importance. So our country is ruled by a government that is racist, that is homophobic, that hates workers, and that hates the working class. And no, we're not talking about the United States, he's talking about Brazil. So Bolsonaro wants to do away with not only the Amazon and with workers' rights, but also with democracy by imposing a dictatorship. But what Bolsonaro has had to come up against is fierce resistance that CSP Conlutas is a part of, called Fora Bolsonaro, right? Out with Bolsonaro. At this moment, there are many and varied kinds of resistance against Bolsonaro. So once COVID-19 numbers came down and folks were able to more freely participate in in-person civic life, there was a rise in all sorts of demonstration, public participation, and resistance. And the reason for that is that inflation is high, anger is high, the prices are through the roof, and folks decided to stand up.
Diversas categorias saíram em luta, professores, funcionários públicos, operários, e diversas greves estão acontecendo.
Teachers, metal workers, que outras categorias estão?
Funcionários públicos, químicos.
Public, workers of all kinds. And so what's disappointing to us is that instead of some of the biggest labor organizations in the country coming together for a general strike, each one of them is just individually obsessed with the electoral process. So we certainly believe that the electoral process is a moment for workers to present radical socialist alternatives to the government that is currently in place, but that should not be the singular focus, and that labor organizations should not revolve around and make their calendars around the electoral process. And so because, right, of this sort of magnetism toward the electoral process, the attention is taken away from moving toward a general strike, and that becomes detrimental to reaching our goals. So I would actually like to highlight for all of you a very important and recent strike, which is the CSN. So that's more than 10,000 workers who at the plant work shifts that are back-to-back and decided to rise up and participate in the strike. This strike was not called by or even supported by the broader labor organization, but instead was called for and executed by the workers on the ground. So CSP, who isn't even a part of representing workers at that plant, decided to go over there in solidarity and stand with those workers. So 3 times there were tentative agreements made by the union leadership with the company, and 3 times those tentative agreements were voted down by the membership. And so we're actually speaking of a symbolic plant where in 1988, in their strike, there was a confrontation with military officials, and 3 deaths occur at that time. So this is actually already a symbolic site of worker struggle.
Foi uma forma de reprimir o movimento dos trabalhadores e poder, dessa forma, acabar com a greve.
And of course it was a way to intimidate and suppress these workers and in effect try to quash the strike. So we are acting in solidarity with these workers because they are at this time without wages, without benefits, and living only off of the solidarity of other workers in their communities who continue to work. And so at this point, we're on a national scale asking for support for these workers who have been fired, and would like to bring this up now in the international forum to make sure that these 200 folks who are fired can be supported by all workers. And so what we're seeing is a level of insustainability of how things are getting geared toward violence toward the people, toward women, and increasingly we're seeing that this is going to have to lead to people unilaterally rising up.
Só isso.
That's it.
Thank you.
There was a good question about Ukraine and NATO that I'll show you now, along with De Silva's answer.
If the workers in Ukraine are aware about the investment of United States and the war in Ukraine, because it's it's around $54 billion, and also the pretension that Ukraine will join NATO.
So this was to Gianluca's question, right? And so there's been a lot of discussion around the European Union and U.S. involvement, because a lot of what the international press is reporting on is not true. The oligarchs and bourgeoisie of Ukraine, they do want all of that U.S. and European, because they see that in that way they can make money, and that is the nature of any bourgeoisie class, right, of a country. But the working class in Ukraine looks at this with skepticism and distrust, and it's because of a simple and historical fact. But those are not so simple to us. Right? They suffered under Soviet dictatorship, and then also suffered with neoliberalism. Any kind of political or economic intervention to them is suspect. Right, and so they do distrust imperialism. And so with regard to your question, yes, the government is attacking Ukrainian workers' rights, and there is conflict there. And in April, they actually passed a motion in the government, or a law that restricts the rights of labor unions. So Zelensky et al. Actually took advantage of the martial law and the crisis, right, to take down what used to be workers' rights. And that's why our support needs to go directly to the workers and labor unions in Ukraine. Because the upper classes in the government are always going to be looking out for their own interests, even while they're being attacked by Russia.
Okay.
So that's it.
And at the very end of the event, all the workers in the Brazilian delegation came up to the front of the room and chanted against their awful president. They chanted, "Down with Bolsonaro."
Fora Bolsonaro! Fora Bolsonaro!
This is a screenshot from a video. It shows Lisa Dimitrieva, a 4-year-old girl. She was walking to class with her mother on a street in Vinnytsia, Ukraine. The video takes place a few moments before one of Putin's missiles blew her to pieces. Her mother also was seriously injured. She lost a leg. Continuing with Ukraine, scholar Simon Pirani, an expert on energy and Soviet history. He spoke on behalf of the Ukrainian Socialist Solidarity Campaign. John Ryman introduces him.
On July 10th, the Ukraine Socialist Solidarity Campaign hosted a meeting at which Simon Pirani spoke on the issue of the situation in Donbass and Crimea and Russia's intervention there in 2014 as a prelude to Russia's invasion at the present time.
The first, about Ukraine being Russia's oldest colony, I think has to be borne in mind in order to understand what's happening now. 19th century, under the Russian Empire, restrictions on language, subordination to imperial institutions, the form of land ownership was Russian dominated. Imperial institution that mattered most to many peasant families was army conscription. So, of course, huge numbers of Ukrainians in the Russian army that fell to pieces during the course of 1917. In 1917, the declaration of the Ukrainian Republic preceded the Bolshevik seizure of power. So during 1917, in the middle of 1917, I think it was June, a Ukrainian Republic was declared in defiance of the Russian Empire, or rather, well, the Russian Empire had gone, but in defiance of Russian imperial traditions, which remained strong. This provoked a huge crisis in the provisional government in Russia, and this government, for much of its existence, was led by left social democrats. Nevertheless, the Bolsheviks had no hesitation in organizing to defeat it militarily and to encourage Russian-speaking workers who were brought down to eastern Ukraine in quite large numbers at that time with the start of the iron and steel industry, to encourage those Russian-speaking workers to oppose the formation of the independent Ukrainian institutions. I cannot recommend too highly the book by Marco Boyson about the working class and the national question in the revolution in the period from the 1890s up until 1918. It's a magnificent piece of scholarship by a Marxist of our generation. I mean, unfortunately, I think that one is expensive, and I don't know that any pirate PDFs are knocking about on the internet. But, you know, if you're a member of a university library or whatever, it's really essential reading to my mind. Now, the fact that Ukraine was the Russian Empire's most important colony remains significant through the Soviet period. And indeed, Soviet policy in the 1920s was actually very strongly in favor of the Ukrainian language. Ukrainian language was obligatory at levels of government in Ukraine. There were arguments which were never resolved about the extent of independence that the Ukrainian Republic would be allowed within the Soviet Union. But there was an understanding of national rights, which included that language law, which I think it'd be really interesting to compare that to the language law of 2018, which is being denounced by every Stalinist and Putinist under the sun. I think in many respects, the one in 1920s was a little stronger. And I know that, for example, to work in any government position, you had to take a Ukrainian language test, and it was a written test, and people would come and check on you. So there was a real fight on that, and that policy was reversed in the mid 1930s. And at the end of the USSR, we should recall that following the big miners' strikes of 1989 and 1990, there was then again a resurgence of national and nationalist movements in many of the Soviet republics, and none more so than Ukraine. They had this huge human chain across the whole country. And this was certainly fundamental in leading to the end of the USSR. So disentangling these national and class questions has never been simple. And I suppose for reasons I'll say in the last bit of what I talk about, I mean, I for many years thought that, the national question in many ways was receding from importance in the 21st century. And I must say the events of the last few months have made me rethink that. Okay, so going on to the second point, which is the character of the Maidan uprising in 2014. The Maidan uprising was preceded, of course, by the Orange Revolution of 2004. And broadly speaking, this was a movement in support of democratic rights. Specifically, it concerned the organized rigging of the presidential election.
More in a future program. Now, a first notice for the next USSC forum. This one is about the infiltration of fascist ideas into sections of the U.S. left. It's coming up Sunday, February 31st at noon Eastern on Zoom. That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller for The Struggle.